In the shadowed valley of Pinecrest, where mountain mists cling to ancient trees, stands a weathered cabin that most villagers avoid. For 15 years, Eleanor Blackwood has lived alone, her days measured by the changing seasons and whispered rumors. The locals cross to the other side of the dirt road when they see her coming, their eyes averted, their children pulled close. They say she brings misfortune. They say she's cursed. What terrible secret could make an entire town turn its back on a woman who once belonged among them? And what will happen when a spirited boy with mud-caked boots and curious eyes ignores the warnings and ventures onto her property one autumn afternoon? Morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across a worn oak table. Eleanor Blackwood's weathered fingers trace the outline of a pressed violet in her garden journal, the flower's color still vibrant against the yellowing page. She noted the date beside it with precise handwriting. October 15, first frost approaching. Her cabin breathed the scents of dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams, rosemary, thyme, lavender. Medicines and memories, suspended in time. Outside, through the window, her garden waited, a tapestry of order amid wilderness. Unlike the chaos of human relationships, plants followed reliable rules. They never whispered behind your back. Eleanor closed the journal, tucking a loose strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear. 15 years of solitude marked in these pages, seasons of planting and harvest, of snowfall and bloom. The margins held more than gardening notes. Town council meeting today. Stayed away. Child's ball rolled to my feet at market. Mother snatched it back without meeting my eyes. Dreams of Sarah again. She donned a faded shawl and stepped onto the porch. The mountains cradled the valley in protective arms, mist still clinging to their peak. Her breath clouded in the chilly air as she surveyed her domain. Vegetable beds meticulously arranged, medicinal herbs segregated by properties, wildflowers allowed their controlled chaos along the fence line. Eleanor moved through her morning ritual with practiced efficiency. Water from the well, kindling for the stove, bread dough set to rise. Her solitude had a rhythm, predictable and safe. The town below remained distant, its church spire barely visible through the trees. At the garden's edge, she knelt beside newly sprouted seedlings, gently touching their fragile stems. Strong despite the cold, she murmured. Her only conversations these days were with plants and the occasional persistent squirrel. The distant sound of children's laughter carried up from the town. Eleanor stiffened, then deliberately relaxed her shoulders. Picking up her basket, she moved along the rows, harvesting late-season herbs with deft motions of her pruning shears. The chamomile is exceptional this year, she said to no one. Most mornings, the solitude felt like armor. Today, it pressed against her chest like a stone. She straightened, rubbing her lower back, and caught sight of movement on the road below, mothers walking children to school, their colorful coats bright against the autumn landscape. Eleanor stood motionless, watching. Once, years ago, she had attempted to give a young mother a jar of honey for her sickly child. The woman had dropped it as if burned, the glass shattering on the cobblestone. "We don't need your kind of help," she had hissed, pulling her wide-eyed daughter away. Eleanor had stopped trying after that. The memory stung fresh as she turned back to her harvesting. Her fingers moved automatically, selecting the best leaves, avoiding the withered or insect-bitten ones. Nature didn't judge. Nature didn't remember or hold grudges. If a tree lost a limb to lightning, it simply grew in a new direction. After the harvest came the processing, washing, chopping, hanging new bundles to dry. Eleanor's remedies could ease coughs, settle stomachs, reduce fevers, not that anyone would accept them now. She made them anyway, a compulsion born of generations of knowledge. Her grandmother's voice still echoed in her mind. "Our gift is for sharing, Ellie. What good is knowing how to heal if you keep it to yourself?" What good indeed. By midday she allowed herself a rest, settling on the porch bench with a cup of mint tea. From here she could see the weekly market beginning in the town square. Dots of color and movement, like ants around sugar. She had once been part of that community, before the darkness, before Sarah, before the accusations. Eleanor opened her journal again, running her fingers over the earliest entries. Back when hope still lived in these pages. When she'd thought time would heal the rift, that understanding would eventually come. Before she accepted that some bridges once burned, left only ashes, a flutter of white caught her attention. Down on the main path, a paper had been tacked to a tree, a notice of some kind. Curious despite herself, Eleanor set aside her tea and walked down to investigate. The announcement proclaimed the upcoming Autumn Harvest Festival, with its traditional games, food, and bonfire. Eleanor's eyes lingered on the words, "All welcome." Knowing the invitation excluded her, without needing to say so, her gaze drifted to the list of organizers. Martha Simmons' name appeared first. Once her closest friend, now just another face that turned away in the market. Eleanor tore her eyes from the notice and turned back toward her cabin. The festival would mean more people on the mountain roads, perhaps even daring each other to venture near the witch's cabin. She would need to be vigilant, stay out of sight. As she climbed the path home, a deer emerged from the trees, regarding her with liquid eyes before bounding away. At least some living things didn't fear her presence. Eleanor squared her shoulders and continued upward, toward her sanctuary and her solitude, the garden journal tucked safely in her pocket, keeper of her truths, when no one else would listen. The town notice board stood in Pinecrest Central Square, plastered with colorful announcements. Martha Simmons adjusted her new poster for the autumn festival, making sure it covered an outdated church announcement rather than any current notices. "Will you be making your apple cider this year, Martha?" Mayor Harmon approached, his substantial frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. The festival wouldn't be the same without it. Martha beamed with pride. "Already started the pressing. I'm adding cinnamon sticks this year." The mayor nodded approvingly, then lowered his voice. "I saw smoke from her chimney yesterday. Winter's coming early up there, I suppose." No clarification was needed on who her was. "Eleanor keeps to herself," Martha replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her poster. "That's best for everyone. 15 years. The mayor shook his head. "Some folks thought she'd leave after what happened." A young mother passing by with a toddler caught the drift of their conversation and instinctively pulled her child closer. The gesture wasn't lost on Martha, who offered a reassuring smile. "Sarah's parents still visit the cemetery every Sunday," Martha added quietly. "Some wounds never heal." The square gradually filled with morning shoppers. Pinecrest prided itself on being close-knit, the kind of place where neighbors noticed if your curtains remained drawn past 9 or if your garden showed signs of neglect. They looked after their own. Elder Thomas hobbled across the cobblestones, his cane tapping a familiar rhythm. At 82, he was the town's oldest resident and self-appointed historian. "Festival preparations coming along?" he inquired, peering at the notice board. "Right on schedule," the mayor confirmed. "We're hoping for better weather than last year." Thomas nodded, then gazed toward the mountains. "Saw lights at odd hours from her cabin last night. Not normal lamplight. Something bluer." Martha and the mayor exchanged glances. "Probably nothing," Martha offered, though uncertainty tinged her voice. "Nothing's ever just nothing with that one," Thomas countered. "My grandmother would have known what to do about her kind. In the old days, we don't do things like in the old days." Mayor Harmon interrupted firmly. "She stays up there, we stay down here." Arrangement worked. The conversation dispersed as other townspeople approached the notice board. Martha returned to the bakery, greeting customers with practiced cheerfulness, but Elder Thomas's words lingered uncomfortably. By midday, the Pinecrest General Store buzzed with activity. Behind the counter, Martha wrapped a loaf of bread for Mrs. Peterson while her husband stocked shelves. "Did you hear about the Watson boy?" Mrs. Peterson leaned forward conspiratorially. "Came down with a fever after picking berries near the North Ridge. Near her property." Martha paused mid-wrapping, Not quite that far, Mrs. Peterson admitted, but close enough. Jane Watson is beside herself. I'm sure it's just a seasonal bug, Martha replied, though her fingers worked faster now, eager to conclude the interaction. The bell above the door jingled as a stocky man with a silver beard entered. Walter Granger, who'd moved to Pinecrest with his grandson only months ago, nodded politely as he approached the counter. "Afternoon," he said. "Need some supplies, preparing for winter." Martha smiled warmly. Newcomers were rare in Pinecrest, and Walter's arrival had stirred considerable interest, especially since he'd purchased the old Jensen place up the mountain, too close to Eleanor's cabin for most locals' comfort, though no one had explicitly warned him. "Your grandson settling in well?" she asked, gathering his requested items. "Theo loves it here. Can't get enough of the mountains." Walter counted out bills on the counter, though he's mentioned some peculiar stories that children tell. Something about a witch. The store fell momentarily silent. Martha's smile stiffened. "Just old mountain tales," she said lightly. "Children's imagination." "Didn't sound like imagination," Walter persisted. "Sounded like someone real they're afraid of." Mayor Harmon, who'd entered unnoticed during the exchange, stepped forward. "Mr. Granger, some friendly advice." His tone remained pleasant, but carried unmistakable authority. "The North Ridge beyond your property. It's best to steer clear. Unstable ground, particularly for a curious boy." Walter studied the mayor thoughtfully. "Unstable ground," he repeated. After Walter left, the mayor turned to Martha. "Perhaps someone should tell him more directly, and sound like superstitious fools." Martha shook her head. "He's a practical man. Wouldn't understand." Later, as dusk gathered, children played in the square while parents chatted nearby, their conversations flowing easily from harvest predictions to roof repairs to Mrs. Johnson's new grandchild. When young Lisa Fowler wandered toward the North Road, her mother called sharply, "Not that way, honey." The child returned obediently, but her question carried clearly in the evening air. "Is that where the bad lady lives?" Mothers exchanged knowing looks. The stories passed down, protective warnings whispered at bedtime. "Don't venture to the North Ridge. The woman there brings sickness." Remember what happened to little Sarah. As darkness fell over Pinecrest, lights glowed in windows and smoke curled from chimneys. Warmth, safety, belonging, and up on the ridge, a solitary light burned in a cabin window, separated from the community below by more than just distance, by 15 years of whispers that had hardened into unquestioned truth. Sunlight dappled through pine branches as Theo Granger scrambled over a fallen log, his worn boots finding secure purchase on the moss-covered bark. At 10 years old, he moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who belonged there, despite having arrived in Pinecrest only 4 months ago. "Found you," he whispered, crouching beside a cluster of mushrooms growing in the tree's shadow. From his pocket, he withdrew a small notebook and pencil stub, carefully sketching the fungi's umbrella shape. His grandfather had taught him to observe before collecting, to remember that every living thing deserved respect. A rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. Theo froze, watching as a red fox emerged cautiously into the clearing. Their eyes met briefly, curious boy and wary predator, before the animal disappeared into the ferns. Theo smiled, reaching for the wooden fox figurine that never left his pocket. His fingers traced the familiar contours, pointed ears, alert stance, bushy tail that he'd carved under his grandfather's guidance. It was his first completed wood-carving project, a celebration of his new mountain home and a reminder of what his grandfather called his fox spirit, quick-witted, independent, unafraid to venture where others wouldn't. The school children in Pinecrest didn't understand Theo's fascination with the forest. They preferred their soccer games and comic books, exchanging wary glances when he shared discoveries of owl pellets or salamander habitats. Mountain Boy, they called him, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with subtle mockery. Theo didn't mind. The mountains spoke to him in ways the town never could. He continued his exploration, climbing higher up the ridge, noting landmarks for his mental map. Grandfather had set boundaries. Never go beyond the lightning-struck pine. Always be home before the sun touches the western peak. But within those limits, Theo was free to roam. A jay's harsh call echoed through the trees. Theo glanced up, distracted, and noticed thin smoke rising above the tree line. He knew that direction led to the cabin everyone in town warned about in hushed voices. "There's a witch on the North Ridge," Tommy Parker had told him on his first day at school. "She casts spells on children who wander too close." "There's no such thing as witches," Theo had replied confidently. "This one's real," Lisa Fowler had insisted. "My mum says she poisoned a little girl years ago." Theo had related these stories to his grandfather that evening, expecting dismissal of such obvious superstition. Instead, Walter Granger had set aside his whittling and fixed his grandson with a serious gaze. "People fear what they don't understand, Theo. Sometimes that fear turns into stories, but fear doesn't make those stories true. So there's just a normal lady living up there. I don't know her story," his grandfather had admitted, "but I do know you should judge people by their actions, not by rumors." Now, staring at the distant smoke, Theo felt the pull of curiosity stronger than caution. The wooden fox seemed to warm in his pocket, encouraging his adventurous spirit. Just a peek, he thought, just to see if she looks like a witch. He marked his path carefully as he climbed higher, using broken twigs and arranged stones as waypoints. The forest thinned, revealing glimpses of a cabin nestled against the mountainside. Unlike the ramshackle structure he'd imagined, this building stood solid and well-maintained, with neat garden beds surrounding it. Theo crept closer, staying within the tree line. A woman worked among the plants, her movements deliberate and practiced. She wore ordinary clothes, not the black robes of storybook witches, and her silver-streaked hair was tied back practically. From this distance, she looked more like someone's grandmother than a villain. A rabbit darted from the underbrush near Theo, startling him. He stepped backward, snapping a twig. The sharp crack seemed impossibly loud in the quiet forest. The woman's head jerked up, scanning the trees. Theo ducked behind a trunk, heart pounding. When he dared peek again, she had returned to her gardening. Though her shoulders remained tense, Theo retreated carefully, marking the location in his mind. Something about the solitary woman and her garden called to him, challenging the frightened whispers from town. He hadn't seen cauldrons or black cats or children in cages, just an ordinary cabin with an extraordinary garden. By late afternoon, Theo had returned to his own home, where his grandfather was preparing stew for dinner. "Productive explorations?" Walter asked, noting the dirt on his grandson's knees. "I found a fox," Theo replied, deliberately omitting his other discovery. He placed his wooden figurine on the windowsill, positioning it to face north, and some mushrooms for your guidebook. As they ate dinner, Theo considered asking about the woman directly, but something held him back. The mystery felt like his own special discovery, a secret between him and the mountain. That night, as crickets chirped outside his window, Theo made a decision. Tomorrow, after his morning chores, he would follow the rabbit trail beyond the lightning-struck pine. Not because of the rumors, but despite them. His fox figurine watched from the bedside table, its carved eyes seeming to glint with approval in the moonlight. Morning frost crunched beneath Theo's boots as he made his way up the forest path. The wooden fox figurine sat securely in his pocket, a talisman of courage. He'd completed his chores in record time, earning a raised eyebrow from his grandfather. "Going exploring again?" Walter had asked, sipping his coffee. "Just the usual places," Theo had replied, avoiding his grandfather's perceptive gaze. Now, as the cabin came into view through the trees, Theo's heart pounded against his ribs. He moved cautiously, staying low among the ferns. The garden looked even more impressive up close. Neat rows of plants, some still defiantly green despite the autumn chill, others harvested to stubble. Stone pathways wound between raised beds, and wind chimes tinkled softly from the porch eaves. No sign of the woman. Perhaps she was inside. A flash of movement caught Theo's eye, a rabbit darting between garden rows. Without thinking, he followed, fascination overriding caution. The rabbit led him through a gap in the low stone wall that surrounded the garden. Theo froze, suddenly aware he had crossed an invisible boundary. He stood among herb beds now, their pungent scent rising as his boots crushed time beneath them. The rabbit disappeared beneath a wooden structure that resembled a miniature house. Clever fellow, that's where you've been hiding. The voice behind him sent a jolt through Theo's body. He spun around, nearly losing his balance. The woman stood 10 feet away, a basket of dried flowers in her arms. Up close, her face showed more years than he'd expected. Deep lines around her eyes and mouth, skin weathered by mountain seasons. Her grey-streaked hair was gathered in a simple knot at her nape, but it was her eyes that caught Theo's attention, clear blue and startlingly alert, taking his measure without blinking. Neither spoke for a long moment. A robin called somewhere in the distance. "Are you lost?" the woman finally asked, her voice neither friendly nor hostile, simply matter-of-fact. Theo swallowed hard. "No, ma'am. Then you're trespassing." She placed her basket on a nearby bench, movements deliberate and controlled. "I was following the rabbit." The explanation sounded flimsy, even to his own ears. "Most children from town avoid this place." Her statement carried a question. "I'm not from town," Theo said, straightening his shoulders slightly. "We moved here 4 months ago. My grandfather and me." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps. "The Jensen place." Theo nodded. "I'm Theo," he offered, then wondered if he should have kept his name to himself. Weren't names powerful in witch stories? The woman didn't immediately respond. Instead, she studied him with that unwavering gaze. Theo fought the urge to fidget under the scrutiny. "You're not afraid," she observed. It wasn't a question, but Theo answered anyway. "Grandfather says fear comes from not understanding things." The woman's lips pressed together, neither smile nor frown. "Your grandfather sounds sensible, unlike most in Pinecrest." Theo's hand found the wooden fox in his pocket, drawing comfort from its familiar shape. "They say you're a witch," he blurted, immediately wishing he could take back the words. To his surprise, the corner of the woman's mouth twitched slightly. "Do they? I don't think you are," he added quickly. "No." She moved toward her garden bench and sat, the basket beside her. "What do you think I am, Theo?" The question felt weighted, important somehow. Theo considered before answering. "A gardener, maybe a doctor. There are lots of plants for medicine here." Something in her posture softened imperceptibly. Both once, now just a gardener. Encouraged by this small confidence, Theo took a step closer. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated, as if unused to being asked such a simple question. Theo took a step closer. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated, as if unused to being asked such a simple question. "Eleanor," she finally said. "Eleanor Blackwood." "Miss Blackwood," Theo tested the name. "Do you live here alone?" "Yes." Her answer was clipped, discouraging further personal inquiries. But Theo, emboldened by the normality of their exchange, gestured toward the rabbit hutch. "Is that where you keep your familiar?" Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "My what? Your familiar? Witches have animal companions with magical powers." He grinned, showing he meant no offense. To Theo's astonishment, Eleanor laughed, a short, rusty sound as if long unused. "It's a rabbit hutch, for rescued rabbits too injured to return to the wild." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant call. "Theo, time for lunch." Theo started, recognizing his grandfather's voice. "I have to go." Eleanor nodded, standing. "Yes, you should." "Can I?" Theo hesitated. "Can I come back sometime?" The question clearly surprised her. Conflict played across her features before she replied. "This isn't a place for children, Theo, because of what happened to Sarah." The words left his mouth before he could consider their impact. Eleanor went very still. "What do you know about Sarah?" "Just what kids at school say, that a girl got sick after visiting you. Go home, Theo." Her voice had lost all warmth. Hearing his grandfather's call again, more insistent this time, Theo turned to leave. In his haste, the red scarf his grandfather had insisted he wear came loose. It fluttered to the ground unnoticed as he ran through the garden and back into the forest. Behind him, Eleanor slowly bent to retrieve the fallen scarf, fingers hesitating before touching the bright fabric, as if it might burn her. The red scarf lay on Eleanor's kitchen table, a startling splash of color against the worn wood. She'd washed it carefully, removing the smudges of dirt, and now it was neatly folded, waiting. For what? She wasn't entirely sure. 3 days had passed since the boy's visit. 3 days of Eleanor glancing more often than necessary toward the forest path. 3 days of telling herself she was merely being vigilant, not hopeful. She picked up the scarf, the wool soft between her fingers. Someone had knitted this with care, the boy's mother perhaps. No, he'd mentioned only his grandfather. Eleanor sighed, setting down the scarf. Returning it was the proper thing to do. The boy, Theo, would need it with winter approaching. But delivering it meant venturing closer to town than she had in months. It meant risking encounters, stares, whispers. "This is foolish," she muttered to herself. She could simply leave it on a tree branch near the property line and let the boy find it on his next unauthorized exploration. But what if animals carried it away? What if he didn't return? The thought brought an unexpected pang. Eleanor moved to her pantry, surveying the shelves of preserves and dried goods. Her hands lingered over a jar of honey, then moved to the ingredients for sweet bread, a recipe her grandmother had taught her, one she rarely bothered making just for herself. An hour later, the cabin filled with the aroma of baking. While the bread cooled, Eleanor wrapped it carefully in clean muslin, then tied the package with the red scarf. A simple kindness, a reciprocal gesture for the brief moment when someone had looked at her without fear. The path to the Jensen place branched off the main forest trail. Eleanor hadn't walked it in years, not since old Mr. Jensen was alive. He'd been one of the few who'd still nod to her when they passed, even after the incident. Her heart quickened as the cabin came into view. Smoke rose from the chimney, and chopped wood was stacked neatly against a wall. Signs of habitation, of life continuing outside her isolation. She slowed her steps, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps she should leave the package on the porch and retreat. A knock would demand interaction, explanations. She wasn't prepared for questions, for the inevitable wariness when the grandfather realized who stood at his door. As she hesitated at the edge of the clearing, the cabin door swung open. A broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a neat beard stepped out, an axe in his weathered hands. He headed toward an unchopped log, positioned it on the stump, and raised the axe. Eleanor stepped back, intending to wait until he finished, and returned inside. Her foot snapped a twig. The man turned sharply, axe still raised. His eyes found her among the trees, not with fear, but with the alert assessment of someone accustomed to wilderness. "Hello there," he called, lowering the axe. "Can I help you?" Too late for retreat. Eleanor stepped forward, clutching the wrapped bread. "I believe your grandson left this at my property," she said, gesturing with the red scarf visible around the package. Recognition dawned in the man's expression. Not fear, interestingly enough, more like curiosity. "You must be the lady from the north cabin," he said. "Theo mentioned meeting you." "Did he?" Eleanor held out the package, maintaining her distance. "He did." The man set down his axe and approached. Movements careful, not from fear, she realized, but a deliberate gentleness. "Said you have quite the garden. I'm Walter Granger." He extended his hand. Eleanor stared at it, momentarily frozen by the ordinary courtesy so long absent from her interactions. After a hesitation, she shifted the package and briefly clasped his hand. "Eleanor Blackwood." Walter nodded, accepting both name and package. "Theo will be glad to have his scarf back. His mother made it for him before she passed." Eleanor winced inwardly at her ignorance. "I'm sorry for your loss. 3 years now." Walter unwrapped the package slightly, the aroma of sweet bread escaping. "You didn't need to do this." It seemed proper. Eleanor took a step back, ready to retreat. "The scarf is clean. Would you like to come in? Theo should be back from collecting kindling soon." The invitation, so casual and unexpected, caught Eleanor off guard. "No," she said quickly. "I should return before dark." Walter didn't press, but his eyes, so like his grandson's in their directness, studied her with quiet assessment. "The townsfolk have interesting stories about you, Miss Blackwood." "I'm sure they do." Her tone cooled. "I don't put much stock in stories," Walter said mildly. "Prefer to make my own judgments." From the forest came the sound of branches snapping and the light footfall that Eleanor already recognized. Panic fluttered in her chest. "Please tell Theo I hope he enjoys the bread," she said hurriedly, already backing toward the trees. Walter nodded, understanding in his expression. "I'll do that. Thank you for returning the scarf." Eleanor turned and walked swiftly into the forest, circling wide to avoid encountering the boy. Behind her, she heard Theo's excited voice. "Grandfather, I found enough kindling for tonight," and she quickened her pace, not waiting to hear if the boy mentioned seeing her. The interaction had been brief, unexpectedly civil, but draining nonetheless. Years of isolation had left her unaccustomed to even simple exchanges. As she climbed the path back to her own cabin, Eleanor realized her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something else, the disorienting sensation of being seen, however briefly, as a person rather than a spectre. "It's the best bread I've ever tasted," Theo declared, licking honey from his fingers. "Even better than Mrs. Simmons from the bakery." Walter smiled, watching his grandson demolish a third slice. "You might want to keep that opinion to yourself in town." "Do you think she made it herself?" Theo asked, already reaching for another piece. "I imagine so." Walter picked up the red scarf, now washed and folded. "Considerate of her to return this. I didn't even notice I'd lost it." Theo's expression turned thoughtful. "She seemed sad when I mentioned Sarah." "Who was she, grandfather?" Walter sighed, choosing his words carefully. "A child who died many years ago. The townspeople believe Miss Blackwood was somehow responsible." "Was she? I don't know the full story. I wasn't living here then." Walter studied his grandson's curious face. "But I do know that fear and grief make people look for someone to blame." Theo absorbed this, chewing slowly. "She's not scary, not really. Just lonely, I think." Walter nodded, reaching for a worn book on the shelf. "Speaking of plants, I found this while unpacking some boxes. Thought you might like it." Theo accepted the leather-bound volume, Mountain Plants and Their Uses. "It was your grandmother's," Walter explained. "She knew every plant in these mountains and what they could do: heal wounds, ease pain, season food." Theo flipped through the pages, pausing at detailed illustrations of familiar forest flora. "Miss Blackwood would like this. She has most of these growing in her garden." "Does she now?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps she's a woman who understands plants, not a witch who casts spells." Theo closed the book, determination settling on his young face. "I'm going to visit her again, to thank her for the bread." "That would be polite," Walter agreed. "But Theo, remember that not everyone welcomes unexpected guests. Ask permission before entering her property." 2 days later, Theo stood at the edge of Eleanor's garden, the plant book clutched in his hands. He'd deliberately chosen mid-morning, when she was usually working outside. Sure enough, Eleanor knelt among her herb beds, pruning shears in hand. This time Theo didn't hide. "Hello, Miss Blackwood." Eleanor startled, shears dropping into the soil as she turned. "Theo," she said, her voice carrying a note of resignation, "you came back. I wanted to thank you for the sweet bread." He approached cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance. It was delicious. Eleanor rose, brushing soil from her knees. "You're welcome, and for returning my scarf. It was my mum's last gift before she died." A flicker of something empathy, perhaps, crossed Eleanor's face. "Your grandfather mentioned that. I'm sorry." Theo nodded, then held out the book. "I brought this to show you. It's about mountain plants. I thought maybe you'd like to see it." Eleanor hesitated, clearly uncertain about this unexpected offering. Finally, curiosity overcame caution, and she accepted the book. Her fingers traced the embossed title with evident recognition. "This is Catherine Miller's work," she said, opening to a familiar page. "These illustrations are exceptional. You know it?" Theo asked, surprised. "My grandmother had a copy." Eleanor's expression softened with memory. "It guided my first lessons in plant lore." "Mine too." "Well, not really lessons yet, but grandfather says I need to learn what's safe and what isn't." Eleanor returned the book, but Theo shook his head. "I thought maybe we could look at it together. You could tell me about some of these plants you grow." The request hung in the air between them. Eleanor glanced toward the forest path, then back at the earnest boy. "Why?" The question held genuine confusion. Theo shrugged. "Because you know things, and because—" He paused, choosing his words with care. "Because everyone needs a friend sometimes." Eleanor stared at him, momentarily speechless. Then, with slow deliberation, she gestured toward a wooden bench near the garden's edge. "We can sit there, for a little while." Theo grinned, following her to the bench. He opened the book between them, pointing to a drawing of a purple flower. "This one grows near our cabin. Grandfather says it's not for eating." "Monkshood," Eleanor confirmed. "Highly toxic, but when prepared properly, it can relieve pain in very small amounts." "Really? How do you prepare it?" As Eleanor explained the careful process of extracting medicinal properties while neutralizing poisons, she found herself relaxing incrementally. The boy asked intelligent questions, his curiosity untainted by suspicion or fear. Time slipped by as they moved through the book, page by page. Eleanor pointed out plants in her garden that matched the illustrations, explaining their uses and the best times for harvesting. "This one," she said, indicating a modest herb with tiny white flowers, "saved your grandfather's sweet bread. It balances the honey's sweetness. You could teach me to bake it," Theo suggested innocently. Eleanor's hands stilled on the page. "Theo, I don't think your grandfather would approve of baking lessons from me." "Why not? He liked the bread too. And he says you're just a woman who understands plants." A complicated emotion crossed Eleanor's face. "Is that what he said? He doesn't believe you're a witch," Theo confirmed earnestly. "Neither do I." From the direction of the forest path came the snap of a twig. Eleanor tensed, looking up sharply. A figure retreated hastily among the trees, someone from the village, she was certain. "You should go, Theo," she said quietly. "Someone saw you here." "So?" The boy's brow furrowed. "We're just looking at a book. In Pinecrest, it's never just anything where I'm concerned." Eleanor closed the book, returning it to him. "Go home now, please." Theo sensed her anxiety and stood reluctantly. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Eleanor hesitated, knowing the right answer was no, knowing she should end this precarious connection before it brought trouble to them both. "After your morning chores," she found herself saying instead, "but ask your grandfather's permission first." Theo nodded solemnly. "I will. Thank you for the plant lesson, Miss Blackwood." As the boy disappeared into the forest, Eleanor remained on the bench, conflict evident in her posture. Something had changed today. A boundary crossed, a wall breached. The consequences remained to be seen. I saw him with my own eyes, sitting right beside her. Lisa Fowler's mother clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she addressed the small gathering in Martha Simmons's back room. They were hunched over a book together, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mayor Harmon frowned, his substantial frame dominating the modest space. "You're certain it was the Granger boy?" "Absolutely certain. Red jacket, same as he wears to school." Martha set out cups of steaming tea, her usually cheerful demeanor subdued. "Perhaps he simply wandered there by accident. Children explore." "This wasn't exploring," Mrs. Fowler insisted. "He was comfortable there, like he'd been before." Elder Thomas tapped his cane against the floorboards. "I warned you all. Newcomers don't understand our ways, don't respect our history." "Let's not overreact," Martha cautioned, though concern lined her face. "Mr. Granger seems reasonable. He probably doesn't know the full story." "Then someone needs to tell him," Mayor Harmon declared, "before history repeats itself." The memory hung unspoken in the air between them. Sarah Miller, just 7 years old, picking berries with friends near the North Ridge, a cut on her palm, Eleanor offering to help with a poultice. 3 days later, the child burning with fever, her small body covered in a strange rash, the doctor away in the next town. Eleanor's desperate attempts to help, using remedies passed down through generations, the terrible night when Sarah stopped breathing. "It wasn't just that she couldn't save her," Mrs. Fowler whispered, voicing what everyone remembered. "It was how the body looked afterward, those marks. The way her eyes had changed color." Martha winced. "Alice, please, I'm only saying what we all know. There was something unnatural about it, something wrong." Mayor Harmon stood decisively. "I'll speak to Granger myself. Man to man, make him understand what's at stake." Across town, Walter opened his front door to find a folded paper on his welcome mat. No name, no explanation, just a message in careful block letters. "Keep your boy away from the witch. She killed before." Walter read it twice, then crumpled it in his fist as Theo entered the room. "What's that?" the boy asked, setting down his schoolbooks. "Nothing important." Walter tossed it into the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken. "How was school today?" "Fine." Theo hesitated. "Tommy Parker wouldn't sit with me at lunch. Said his mother told him to stay away from me." Walter's jaw tightened. "I see. Is it because I visited Miss Blackwood? Lisa's mother saw us yesterday. Word travels fast in small towns." Walter sat at the kitchen table, gesturing for Theo to join him. "Does it bother you what the other children think?" Theo considered this. "Not really. They believed she was a witch before they ever met her. I actually talked to her, so I know better." Walter smiled faintly at his grandson's logic. "And what do you think she is?" "Lonely," Theo answered promptly, "and sad, but also smart about plants and baking." He looked directly at his grandfather. "She told me to ask your permission before visiting again." "Did she?" Walter leaned back considering. "That was responsible of her. So can I." Visit her again. Before Walter could answer, a firm knock sounded at the door. Mayor Harmon stood on the porch, hat in hand, expression grave. "Evening, Granger. Got a moment to talk?" Walter gestured Theo toward his room. "Start your homework. I'll be in soon." Once the boy was out of earshot, Walter faced the mayor. "I assume this is about Eleanor Blackwood." Harmon's eyebrows rose slightly at Walter's use of her first name. "So you know who she is?" "I know she returned my grandson's lost scarf, along with freshly baked bread. I know she's been nothing but appropriate with him. Beyond that, I've heard plenty of whispers but few facts." "The facts," Harmon said heavily, "are that 15 years ago, a child died after being in Eleanor's care. The circumstances were disturbing. I understand there was illness involved. Children fall ill, Mayor. Not like this." Harmon's voice lowered. "I was there that night. Saw what was left of little Sarah. Some things can't be explained by ordinary sickness." Walter crossed his arms. "I'm not a superstitious man, neither am I. But I know what I saw." Harmon leaned forward. "Look, you seem like a decent fellow, new to our community, trying to raise your grandson right. I respect that, but there are things you don't understand about this situation. Then explain them to me. With evidence, not rumors." Harmon shook his head. "Some things you had to witness to believe. All I'm asking is that you keep your boy away from her, for his own safety." From the hallway came the sound of a floorboard creaking. Walter glanced over to see Theo quickly retreating toward his bedroom. "I appreciate your concern," Walter told Harmon evenly, "but I'll decide what's best for my grandson." "The community won't stand for it," Harmon warned. "Folks are already talking. Your boy's being ostracized at school. That's just the beginning." "Are you threatening us?" "Warning you," Harmon corrected, reaching for the door. "Eleanor Blackwood destroyed one family in this town already. Don't let yours be next." After the mayor left, Walter found Theo sitting on his bed, the plant book open on his lap. "You heard," Walter said. "It wasn't a question." Theo nodded. "They think she killed Sarah." Walter sat beside him. "What do you believe?" "I believe," Theo said slowly, "that Miss Blackwood wouldn't hurt anyone on purpose, especially not a child." Walter placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Then we won't judge her based on rumors. But Theo, we need to be thoughtful about this. The situation is complicated. Can I still visit her?" Walter sighed, weighing his responsibility to his grandson against his instinctive distrust of mob mentality. "Yes, but I'm coming with you next time. I'd like to form my own opinion of Eleanor Blackwood." The morning fog clung to the forest floor as Theo crept along a narrow deer path. 3 weeks had passed since Mayor Harmon's visit, and much had changed. Walter had indeed accompanied Theo to Eleanor's cabin that next day, a tense but civil encounter that had ended with a grudging respect between the adults. What hadn't changed was the town's attitude. If anything, Theo's continued association with the witch had only deepened his isolation at school. Even the teacher had grown distant, checking his work with perfunctory nods rather than the encouraging smiles she gave other students. Theo adjusted his backpack, which contained today's peace offering, honey cakes his grandfather had helped him bake. The main path to Eleanor's cabin was now watched occasionally by concerned villagers, so Theo had charted an alternative route. His hand-drawn map, carefully hidden beneath his mattress at home, detailed the secret trail that avoided open areas visible from town. "Always tell me when you're going," Walter had insisted, after realizing he couldn't dissuade his grandson's friendship with Eleanor. "And be home before sunset. No exceptions." These terms established, Theo had spent hours of the past weeks learning from Eleanor about plants, yes, but also about patience, observation, and the quiet satisfaction of tending growing things. He found in her neither the frightening witch of village lore nor the pitiable recluse he'd first imagined, but a knowledgeable woman with a dry sense of humor that emerged gradually, like spring buds unfurling. Today the garden gate was already open when he arrived, Eleanor kneeling beside her herb beds with a small trowel. "You're early," she observed without looking up, having grown accustomed to his footsteps. "No school today. Teacher meetings." Theo settled beside her, immediately reaching for a small weeding fork. He knew the routine now. They worked in companionable silence, Eleanor occasionally identifying an unfamiliar plant or explaining why certain herbs thrived beside others, while some needed separation. Theo absorbed these lessons eagerly, storing away knowledge that none of his schoolmates possessed, a secret education that felt more valuable than arithmetic or spelling. "Grandfather sent honey cakes," he announced when they paused for water. Eleanor accepted one with a slight smile. He's a good baker. He says I'm getting better too. Theo brushed soil from his hands. He's teaching me his mother's recipes. That's a fine heritage to pass down. Eleanor's eyes took on the distant look that sometimes appeared when conversations touched on family. Knowledge shared between generations keeps more than recipes alive. Theo nodded, sensing the weight behind her words. Miss Blackwood, can I ask you something important? She tensed slightly but nodded. Did you really try to help Sarah before she died? Eleanor's hands stilled. She'd known this question would eventually come, but had dreaded it nonetheless. Yes, she answered simply. Her friends brought her to me when she cut her hand on something in the forest, an old metal trap, badly rusted. The doctor was away. I cleaned the wound and made a poultice to draw out infection, but it didn't work. The infection was already in her blood by then, moving too quickly. Eleanor's voice remained steady, but grief shadowed her eyes. I tried everything I knew, traditional remedies, poultices, teas to reduce fever. I stayed with her through the night, but by morning, it wasn't your fault, Theo said with a child's direct compassion. Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully. Many in town believe otherwise. They're wrong. His certainty was absolute. The world isn't always divided neatly into right and wrong, Theo. Fear and grief can cloud judgment. Even good people can believe false things when they're afraid. This complexity seemed to puzzle the boy, but he accepted it, turning the conversation to lighter subjects. They harvested late carrots from the vegetable garden and collected seeds from spent flower heads for next year's planting. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Theo helped Eleanor prepare dried herbs for storage, a task requiring careful handling and attention to detail. His small fingers proved adept at bundling delicate stems. You have a gift for this, Eleanor observed. A natural sensitivity to plants. Theo beamed at the rare praise. My mother loved gardening too. Grandfather says I get it from her. Your mother sounds like a special woman. She was. Theo carefully tied another bundle with twine. I don't remember her much, but I feel close to her when I'm working with plants. He glanced up. Is that strange? Not at all. Eleanor's voice softened. Those we love leave their mark on us in many ways. The autumn sun began its early descent, signaling time for Theo to leave. Eleanor packed a small bundle of chamomile tea for Walter, who had mentioned sleeping poorly since the weather turned. For dreamless nights, she explained, 2 pinches in hot water before bed. Theo tucked it carefully into his backpack, alongside the plant book, which now contained his own observations in the margins, notes made under Eleanor's guidance. Their shared annotations formed a growing dialogue of discovery. Tomorrow after school, he asked, following their established pattern. Eleanor nodded, though a shadow crossed her face. The weather's turning, Theo. Soon snow will make the path difficult. I'll still come, he promised. I found an old walking stick that helps with slippery parts. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, Take the south path today. Mrs. Fowler was gathering pine needles on the main trail earlier. Theo nodded gratefully. These small protections had become part of their routine, Eleanor watching for villagers, Theo varying his routes, a private conspiracy of friendship against the town's disapproval. From the edge of the forest, Theo turned back for a final wave. When Eleanor stood framed in her garden, solitary but no longer quite alone, her hand raised briefly in farewell before she returned to her work. Neither noticed the distant figure on the ridge above, observing through field glasses, noting the boy's direction as he disappeared into the trees. Walter Granger sat at his kitchen table, reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, surrounded by yellowed newspaper clippings borrowed from the town archives. His research had started innocuously enough, simple curiosity about Eleanor Blackwood's history after his first proper meeting with her. But what began as casual inquiry had deepened into something more deliberate as he uncovered inconsistencies in the town's accepted narrative. The local newspaper's account of Sarah Miller's death mentioned suspicious circumstances and unconventional treatments, but provided no medical details. The death certificate, which Walter had quietly examined at the county records office, listed cause as systemic infection of unknown origin. No mention of witchcraft or malice, just tragedy, documented in the clinical language of bureaucracy. Most telling was what Walter couldn't find, any record of an official investigation. If foul play had truly been suspected, surely authorities beyond Pinecrest would have been involved. Instead, it seemed the town had reached its own conclusions, becoming judge and executioner of Eleanor's reputation. Walter sorted through another stack of clippings. An older article caught his eye, a feature about local herbalists from 20 years earlier, before Sarah's death. A younger Eleanor stood among a group of women displaying medicinal preparations at the harvest festival. The caption identified her as Eleanor Blackwood, whose family remedies have assisted numerous residents through winter ailments. Once respected, then reviled, the transformation troubled Walter deeply. A soft knock preceded Theo's entrance. The boy paused in the doorway, taking in the scattered papers. "Homework?" he asked, setting down his backpack. "Research," Walter corrected, removing his glasses. "How was today's visit?" "Good. We harvested carrots and collected seeds." Theo approached the table, glancing curiously at the clippings. "What are you researching?" "History." Walter hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm trying to understand what really happened to Sarah Miller." Theo's expression grew serious. "Miss Blackwood told me about it. She said she tried to help but couldn't." "I believe her." Walter tapped a clipping. "The facts don't support what the town believes. There's no evidence of wrongdoing, just fear and superstition filling gaps in understanding." "Then why do they still blame her?" "People need explanations, especially for painful events. Sometimes a convenient explanation becomes truth, whether it's accurate or not." Walter gathered the clippings into a neat stack. "I think it's time I spoke with Eleanor directly about this." Theo brightened. "Can I come?" "Not this time. Some conversations need to happen between adults first." The next afternoon found Walter making the now familiar journey to Eleanor's cabin. Unlike Theo, he took the main path openly, unconcerned about being seen. Let the town talk, they already were. Eleanor was harvesting the last of her root vegetables when he arrived. She straightened at his approach, surprise evident in her expression. "Walter, is something wrong?" "Theo's not ill." "Is he?" "Theo's fine. He's with Martha Simmons' son today, a school project." Walter gestured to her porch. "I was hoping we might talk." Wariness crossed Eleanor's face, but she nodded, brushing soil from her hands. "Would you like tea?" "Please." Inside, Eleanor's cabin revealed itself as neither the witch's den of legend nor the Spartan shelter he'd imagined, but a well-ordered home filled with books, dried plants, and simple comforts. Walter accepted a steaming mug, noting the care with which Eleanor prepared it, measuring herbs precisely, steeping them exactly 3 minutes by the kitchen clock. "You've been kind to Theo," he began. "I appreciate that. Not many would have welcomed a curious boy into their private world." Eleanor settled across from him. "Theo is unusual, perceptive beyond his years, like his mother was." Walter's voice softened with memory. Catherine had a gift for seeing beyond surfaces. At the name, Eleanor's hands tightened around her mug. "Catherine," she repeated carefully. Walter nodded. "My late daughter-in-law. She passed 3 years ago. Pneumonia that turned severe very quickly. I'm sorry for your loss." Eleanor's response seemed genuine but guarded. "Thank you." Walter took a deliberate breath. "I've been researching what happened with Sarah Miller." Eleanor's posture stiffened visibly. "Why?" "Because I don't believe you're what this town has made you out to be." Walter placed a newspaper clipping on the table between them, the old photograph of Eleanor at the harvest festival. "You were respected once, a healer, not a witch. That was a different life." Eleanor didn't touch the clipping, but stared at her younger image with complex emotion. "What really happened, Eleanor?" The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor's gaze shifted to the window, where mountains stood silhouetted against the afternoon sky. "Sarah cut herself on a rusted trap in the woods," she finally said. "By the time her friends brought her to me, the wound was already inflamed. I cleaned it, applied poultices, gave her fever remedies passed down through generations of my family, but she died anyway." Eleanor nodded, grief evident in the line of her shoulders. Blood poisoning moved too quickly. By morning, her body was covered in strange markings, part of the infection's progression. The town saw those marks and decided they were unnatural. "And no one defended you? No one questioned this?" "The doctor tried. He'd been called to another town but examined Sarah afterward. Said it was severe septicemia. Nothing supernatural, but grief doesn't listen to medical explanations. It needs someone to blame. So you became their scapegoat." Eleanor's eyes met his directly. I accepted that role. It seemed kinder somehow, to give their pain a focus. 15 years of isolation isn't kindness, Eleanor. It's punishment for a crime you didn't commit. Perhaps. She rose, collecting their empty mugs. But why does this matter to you now? Walter stood as well, his decision crystallizing. Because my grandson believes in you, and I'm starting to think he's right. Dark clouds gathered over Pinecrest, bringing an early twilight to the mountain valley. Wind rattled windows and sent dried leaves skittering across porches as townspeople hurried to secure livestock and bring in firewood. The Meteorological Service had issued warnings. A powerful autumn storm, unseasonably fierce, would arrive by nightfall. Eleanor worked quickly in her garden, harvesting what might be damaged by the coming deluge. Her experienced eye had read the approaching weather in the morning's peculiar stillness, the heavy feel of the air, the way birds had fallen silent hours earlier than usual. She'd spent the day preparing, checking roof shingles, clearing drainage channels, storing extra water. As she tied down her herb-drying frames, Eleanor glanced toward the forest path. Theo hadn't visited today. School would have been dismissed early with the weather warnings. Still, she found herself listening for his familiar footsteps, a habit formed over weeks of regular visits. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as she secured the last of her preparations. By the time she closed her cabin door behind her, rain drummed steadily on the roof, driven by gusts that moaned through the pine trees surrounding her home. Eleanor lit lamps and stoked the fire, settling in for a long night of nature's fury. She had weathered countless storms alone over the years, finding strange comfort in the reminder of forces more powerful than human fears and judgments. Tonight, however, a peculiar restlessness troubled her. She moved from window to window, watching the storm's progress with unusual anxiety. Just as she put a kettle on for tea, an urgent pounding at her door startled her. No one came to her cabin after dark, especially not in such weather. Eleanor opened the door to find Walter Granger on her porch, soaked to the skin, desperation etched on his face. "It's Theo," he gasped between labored breaths. "High fever, delirious. Started suddenly this afternoon." Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. "Have you called a doctor? Phone lines are down from the storm, roads already washing out." Walter's hands gripped the doorframe. "Eleanor, he's burning up. Nothing I do helps." She didn't hesitate. "Wait here." Eleanor moved with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies into a worn leather medical bag that had sat unused on a high shelf for years. Herbs, tinctures, poultices, bandages, tools of a healer's trade. She had once practiced openly. "This isn't wise," she warned, pulling on a heavy coat. "The townspeople, damn what they think," Walter cut in. "My grandson needs help." The journey to Walter's cabin was treacherous. Rain fell in blinding sheets, transforming the forest path into a muddy torrent. They fought their way forward, supporting each other against the wind's brutal force. Theo lay in his bed, small face flushed crimson against white pillows. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and when Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his forehead, the heat radiating from his skin alarmed her. "How long?" she asked, already opening her medical bag. "Started with a headache after lunch. By dinner, he couldn't stand." Walter hovered anxiously. "I've given him willow bark tea, cold compresses. Nothing breaks the fever." Eleanor examined the boy thoroughly, checking his throat, feeling lymph nodes, inspecting his skin for rashes. When she rolled up his sleeve, she found it, an inflamed puncture wound on his forearm, angry red streaks extending outward. "What is it?" Walter asked, seeing her expression change. "Infection. Something punctured the skin, a thorn perhaps, or a splinter." Eleanor's voice remained calm while her mind raced. "The infection is spreading rapidly, like with Sarah," Walter said quietly. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Yes." Outside, thunder crashed and lightning briefly illuminated the cabin. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. A child with a mysterious fever. Eleanor the only one available to help, the town's warning hanging unspoken between them. "What do you need?" Walter asked simply. Relief flooded through Eleanor at his trust. Clean water, fresh cloths, and this, she removed a small mortar and pestle from her bag. "I need to prepare a poultice for the wound." As Walter gathered supplies, Eleanor opened a hidden compartment in the medical bag's lining. From it she withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by generations of hands. Inside nested vials of tinctures, family remedies too potent for casual use, reserved for dire circumstances. My grandmother called this our medicine of last resort, she explained as Walter returned. It's powerful, especially against blood infections. She worked with methodical precision, combining herbs with practiced hands, heating mixtures over a small spirit flame. The familiar ritual steadied her nerves, even as worry twisted in her stomach. This was too similar to that night 15 years ago. The desperate measures, the child's burning skin, the storm isolating them from help. Will it work? Walter asked, watching her prepare the final tincture. I pray so. Eleanor's voice carried the weight of old pain. The infection has a hold, but we've caught it earlier than she didn't finish the sentence. Together they worked through the night, battling Theo's climbing fever. Eleanor applied poultices to the infected wound, administered herbal tinctures drop by careful drop, placed cooling compresses on his burning forehead. Walter supported his grandson's head, coaxing liquids between parched lips, whispering encouragements to the delirious child. Near dawn, as the storm's fury began to abate, Theo's fever spiked dangerously high. He thrashed against the bedsheets, calling out in confusion. Eleanor, exhausted but determined, prepared the strongest remedy she possessed, a deep amber liquid in a blue glass vial. This is my final option, she told Walter gravely. My family has used it for generations, but it's controversial. Will it save him? It might, or it might not help at all. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly. This is what I gave Sarah, at the end, what they claimed poisoned her. Walter absorbed this, looking between the mysterious tincture and his suffering grandson. Then, with deliberate movements, he took the vial from Eleanor and held it to Theo's lips himself. We try everything, he said firmly. As the first light of dawn filtered through rain-washed windows, neither spoke of what might come with morning, a healed child or another tragedy, redemption or final condemnation. They simply continued their vigil, united in determination against the shadow hovering over the small bed. Morning light crept through the curtains, revealing Theo's flushed face against the pillow. The fever hadn't broken. If anything, his condition had worsened despite Eleanor's treatments. Walter dozed in a chair beside the bed, exhaustion finally claiming him after the night's vigil. Eleanor pressed the back of her hand to Theo's forehead, her heart sinking at the heat radiating from his skin. The infection was advancing rapidly, resistant to her remedies. Doubt crept in, familiar and bitter, the same helplessness she'd felt with Sarah. A soft knock at the front door startled her. Through the window, Eleanor glimpsed Martha Simmons on the porch, a basket over her arm. The storm's aftermath had drawn the shopkeeper up the mountain to check on neighbors. Walter stirred, immediately alert. Who is it? Martha Simmons, Eleanor whispered. You should answer. I'll stay out of sight. But before Walter could rise, the bedroom door creaked open. Martha stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Eleanor bent over Theo's bed, medicinal herbs and tinctures spread across the nightstand. What is she doing here? Martha's voice trembled between shock and accusation. Martha, Walter began, standing to intercept her. Have you lost your mind? Martha stepped backward. After everything this town told you, Theo's sick. The roads are washed out. Eleanor is helping. Martha's gaze fixed on the blue vial in Eleanor's hand. Helping? Like she helped Sarah Miller. Eleanor set down the medicine. Martha, please, this isn't what you think. I need to get the doctor, Martha said, backing toward the door. And the mayor. The doctor is 3 towns over dealing with storm injuries, Walter countered. And Theo doesn't have time to wait. Listen to yourself, Martha pleaded. She's clouding your judgment, just like before. On the bed, Theo moaned softly, his head rolling side to side. His eyelids fluttered, revealing unfocused gaze. The flowers, he murmured. Blue flowers by the creek. She said, don't touch. Martha froze. What did he say? He's delirious, Walter explained. Talking nonsense since midnight. But Eleanor had gone still, listening intently as Theo continued in disjointed phrases. The girl with yellow hair, crying by the water. Cut her hand. Don't use the berries. Poisonous. Eleanor leaned closer. Theo. What girl? Sarah, he whispered, though he couldn't possibly know the name. Shouldn't eat those berries. Tried to tell her. Martha made a choked sound. How does he know these things? Eleanor's mind raced. The specific details. Blue flowers. The creek. Berries. These weren't common knowledge. Even she hadn't known about berries. Sarah had told her only about cutting her hand on a metal trap. Martha, Eleanor said carefully, did Sarah like to eat wild berries? The shopkeeper's face drained of color. How did you? Her mother always scolded her for it, Walter interjected, remembering town gossip. Said someday she'd eat something poisonous. Theo's fingers scrabbled at the blanket, sketching patterns only he could see. With trembling hands, Eleanor provided him paper and a pencil from the nightstand. His feverish movements produced crude drawings, a creek, flowers, a small figure with long hair reaching toward something in the water. Martha approached slowly, transfixed by the child's drawings. Sarah was gathering flowers for her mother's birthday, the day she was hurt, by Willow Creek. None of us knew exactly what happened. She was alone when she cut herself. Eleanor studied the drawings, a terrible suspicion forming. Walter, in my bag. There's a field guide to local flora. He quickly produced the worn book. Eleanor flipped through pages until she found what she sought, illustrations of a plant with delicate blue flowers and dark berries. Nightshade, she said softly. It grows along Willow Creek. The berries looked like blueberries to an untrained eye. Understanding dawned on Martha's face. You think Sarah ate poisonous berries before she came to you? That's what caused her illness. The cut was inflamed, but not severely enough to cause such rapid decline, Eleanor confirmed. If she ingested nightshade berries and didn't tell anyone, no treatment would have saved her, Walter finished grimly. Theo moaned again, his drawings becoming more erratic. Can't reach her, water's too fast. Martha sank into a chair, visibly shaken. How could he know these things? He wasn't even here when it happened. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Walter. Some children are sensitive to impressions others can't perceive. Theo has always connected deeply with this place. Perhaps he's sensing echoes of what happened, or perhaps he's just very ill and hallucinating, Walter suggested pragmatically, though his expression betrayed doubt. Martha stared at the mysterious drawings, 15 years of certainty beginning to fracture. If what you're suggesting is true, a commotion outside interrupted her. Through the window, they could see several figures approaching the cabin, Mayor Harmon at the lead, followed by Elder Thomas and 2 other men. They've come for me, Eleanor said quietly. Walter moved toward the door. I won't let them in. No, Eleanor stopped him with a gentle hand. Let them come. It's time to end this one way or another. Martha stood, resolve hardening her features. I'll speak to them first. As she left the room, Eleanor turned back to Theo. His condition remained critical, the fever burning through his small body despite everything she had tried. If her suspicion about nightshade was correct, and if Theo had somehow encountered it as well, Eleanor reached for her medicine box with new determination. From its depths she withdrew a final remedy, one she hadn't dared use, not since Sarah, a clear tincture in a small crystal vial. This is our last hope, she told Walter, as voices rose in the next room. If nightshade poisoning is contributing to the infection, Walter nodded grimly. Do what you must. Outside, Martha's voice carried through the thin walls. Before you barge in there making accusations, there's something you all need to see. The cabin's main room filled with tension as Mayor Harmon stood with arms crossed, flanked by Elder Thomas and 2 other men from town. Rain dripped from their coats onto the wooden floor. Martha positioned herself between them and the bedroom door, her usual accommodating demeanor replaced by unexpected resolve. Step aside, Martha, Mayor Harmon said. We know she's here, and I'm telling you there's something you need to see first. Martha's voice remained firm despite her trembling hands. Walter emerged from the bedroom, closing the door behind him. His expression was stone, the protective stance of a man guarding his territory. This is my home. You have no right to barge in. We have every right when a child's welfare is at stake, Elder Thomas retorted, his age doing nothing to diminish his righteous indignation. She's with the boy, isn't she? Eleanor is treating my grandson, Walter confirmed unapologetically, and you'll not interfere. Mayor Harmon stepped forward. Have you lost your mind, Granger? Do you know what happened the last time? I know what you believe happened, Walter cut in. I also know you never questioned it, never investigated properly. From outside came the sounds of more arrivals. Word had spread through town. Frightened whispers and angry murmurs filtered through the walls. This isn't just about the past, said one of the men, whom Walter recognized as Sarah Miller's uncle. It's about protecting another child from the same fate. Martha picked up Theo's fever drawings from the table where she'd placed them. "Look at these first. Really look." The men exchanged skeptical glances, but studied the crude illustrations. The creek, the flowers, the child reaching into water. "What are these supposed to be?" Mayor Harmon asked impatiently. "Theo drew them in his fever," Walter explained. "He's been talking about Sarah, the creek, poisonous berries, things he couldn't possibly know." Sarah's uncle paled visibly. "What kind of trick is this?" "No trick," Martha said quietly. "I was there when he drew them. He spoke of blue flowers by the creek, of Sarah eating berries, things none of us ever discussed." Elder Thomas snorted. "The woman has corrupted his mind with her tales." "Eleanor never mentioned berries to him," Walter insisted. "None of us knew about them until Theo's fever visions." The bedroom door opened, and Eleanor appeared, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her posture dignified. The room fell silent. "You've come to drive me away again," she said, addressing the group collectively. "To blame me for another child's illness. You have no business touching that boy," Mayor Harmon began. "Without her, Theo would be dead already," Walter interrupted harshly. "While you were holding your witch hunt, she's been fighting all night to save him." Eleanor raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "I believe I know what's happening to Theo, the same thing that happened to Sarah." She approached the table, placing her worn field guide beside Theo's drawings. "These blue flowers Theo keeps mentioning, they're nightshade, deadly poisonous if ingested, especially the berries." "What's your point?" Sarah's uncle demanded. "Sarah cut herself on a rusty trap." "Yes, but I now believe she had also eaten nightshade berries beforehand, mistaking them for blueberries. She never mentioned it, perhaps fearing punishment for eating wild plants." Martha nodded slowly. "Sarah was always eating things from the forest. Her mother constantly worried. The infection from the cut was severe but treatable," Eleanor continued. "The undiagnosed nightshade poisoning is what truly killed her, and it's what's threatening Theo now." "Convenient explanation after 15 years, Elder Thomas scoffed. "I treated what I could see," Eleanor said quietly. "I failed Sarah because I didn't know what I couldn't see." From the bedroom came a sudden cry. Eleanor turned immediately, Walter close behind. The others followed instinctively, concern for the child momentarily overriding their suspicions. Theo thrashed against his blankets, his small body arched in pain. Fresh drawings lay scattered across the bed, more detailed now, showing what looked like a child hiding berries in a pocket, a second figure watching from trees. "He's getting worse," Walter said hoarsely. Eleanor reached for the crystal vial she'd prepared. "This is his only chance now. It's an antidote specifically for nightshade poisoning." "Don't you dare!" Sarah's uncle surged forward, but Martha and Walter blocked his path. "Wait," Mayor Harmon said unexpectedly. His eyes were fixed on one of Theo's drawings, a distinct image of Willow Creek's bend, with a particular fallen tree he recognized. How could the boy know this place so precisely? He's never been there. A hush fell over the room. The mayor picked up another drawing, showing a girl with something cupped in her palm, berry-like objects clearly depicted. His certainty seemed to waver. "I remember the autopsy report mentioned unexplained compounds in Sarah's blood," he said slowly. "The doctor couldn't identify them." "Nightshade toxins," Eleanor confirmed. "Similar symptoms to severe infection in the early stages. By the time distinctive signs appear, it's often too late." On the bed, Theo's breathing grew more labored. Eleanor held up the vial, her eyes moving from one town leader to another. "I need to give him this now," she said with quiet authority. "You can remove me from this cabin afterward if you still believe I mean harm. But first, let me try to save this child in a way I couldn't save Sarah." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, surprisingly, it was Sarah's uncle who spoke. "Do it," he said gruffly, "if there's any chance." Eleanor didn't wait for further permission. With gentle hands, she lifted Theo's head and administered the tincture drop by careful drop. The boy swallowed reflexively, then fell into an uneasy stillness. "Now we wait," she said, sinking into the chair beside the bed. "And pray." Outside, the gathered villagers had drafted a petition demanding Eleanor's immediate removal from the community. The document circulated from hand to hand, collecting signatures with grim determination, unaware of the scene unfolding within the cabin's walls. Hours passed in tense vigil around Theo's bed. Eleanor monitored his breathing, checking his pulse with practiced fingers, while the others watched in uneasy silence. The antidote would either work or it wouldn't. There was nothing more anyone could do but wait. Outside, the crowd had grown. Occasional shouts penetrated the cabin walls, but Mayor Harmon had ordered everyone to remain outside until the situation with Theo resolved one way or another. His fever's dropping, Eleanor finally announced, relief evident in her voice. His pulse is steadier too. Walter touched his grandson's forehead, confirming the coolness with his own hand. He's sweating. That's good, isn't it? Eleanor nodded. His body is fighting back now. The worst has passed. A collective exhalation of breath filled the room. Even Elder Thomas's stern countenance softened momentarily before he caught himself and resumed his skeptical frown. Coincidence, he muttered, or perhaps he was simply due to improve. Martha shot him a sharp look. Thomas, for heaven's sake, we still have questions that need answers. Mayor Harmon interjected, though his voice had lost some of its accusatory edge. These drawings, the things the boy knew, I can't explain them, Eleanor admitted, except to say some children seem able to access memories not their own. It's rare but documented. Elder Thomas cleared his throat, an unexpected hesitance in his manner. There is something I've kept to myself all these years. All eyes turned to him. After Sarah passed, Dr. Hendricks, who examined her, gave me a sealed letter. Thomas avoided looking at Eleanor, asked me to deliver it to the town council, and Mayor Harmon prompted when Thomas fell silent. I never delivered it. The old man's shoulders slumped. The town was already convinced of certain conclusions. The letter might have complicated matters. Complicated matters, Walter repeated incredulously. A child died. An innocent woman was condemned, and you withheld evidence because it might have complicated matters. Thomas bristled. I was protecting the community. Unified grief is easier to bear than doubt and division. Where is this letter now? Martha asked quietly. I kept it. Thomas reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age but still sealed. Never opened it. Never destroyed it either. Eleanor stared at the envelope, her face a study in controlled emotion. 15 years, she said softly. 15 years of solitude and suspicion. Read it, Walter urged, his hand still resting protectively on Theo's shoulder. Mayor Harmon took the letter, breaking the seal with deliberate movements. The room fell silent as he unfolded the pages, his expression changing as he scanned the contents. It's from Dr. Hendricks, he confirmed, then began to read aloud. To the Pinecrest Town Council, I write this in my capacity as medical examiner regarding the tragic death of Sarah Miller. While inflammation from her injured hand showed signs of blood poisoning, my thorough examination revealed additional symptoms inconsistent with simple infection. Specifically, the dilation of pupils, particular discoloration of the skin, and the presence of undigested seeds in the stomach contents strongly suggest nightshade poisoning as a contributing or primary cause of death. The mayor paused, looking up at the stricken faces around him before continuing. Miss Blackwood's treatments for infection were appropriate and professionally administered. Had nightshade poisoning been identified earlier, different interventions might have been possible, though I cannot state with certainty they would have succeeded, given the apparent quantity ingested. It is my professional opinion that no negligence or malice occurred on Miss Blackwood's part. Rather, she attempted to treat a visible condition without knowledge of the underlying poisoning. I recommend the town consider this matter a tragic accident rather than assigning blame. In service to truth and community healing, Dr. James Hendricks, silence filled the room as the words settled over them. Martha wiped tears from her cheeks, while Sarah's uncle stared blankly at the floor, foundations of long-held beliefs crumbling. Why didn't Dr. Hendricks speak publicly? Walter finally asked. He tried, Eleanor said quietly, but he left for his new position in Westfield shortly after Sarah's death. By then minds were made up, and no one wanted to hear it, Martha added, shame evident in her voice. We needed someone to blame. Mayor Harmon carefully refolded the letter, his hands not entirely steady. All these years, I accept my portion of responsibility, Eleanor said. I could have fought harder against the accusations, could have demanded a proper investigation. Why didn't you? Sarah's uncle asked, genuine confusion replacing hostility. Eleanor's gaze drifted to Theo, who slept peacefully now, the fever finally broken. Sarah's parents were devastated. The town needed healing. Sometimes accepting blame is easier than forcing others to confront painful truths. That wasn't your decision to make, Walter said gently. Truth matters, however difficult. On the bed, Theo stirred, his eyes fluttering open for the first time in hours. "Grandfather," he murmured weakly. Walter leaned close. "I'm here, son. You're going to be fine." Theo's gaze moved beyond his grandfather to Eleanor. A faint smile touched his lips. "The flowers," he whispered. "Blue flowers. Dangerous. She knows now." "Who knows?" Eleanor asked softly, leaning closer. "Sarah," Theo replied simply before drifting back to sleep. The adults exchanged glances, a current of something beyond rational explanation passing through the room. Outside, the crowd continued to grow, the petitions circulating from hand to hand, signatures accumulating beneath demands for Eleanor's removal. Unaware that inside, the foundations of their certainty had already begun to crumble. 3 days passed before Theo regained enough strength to sit up in bed. The crowd outside Walter's cabin had eventually dispersed, but tension still hung over Pinecrest like the lingering mist that clung to the valley each morning. Eleanor had remained to monitor Theo's recovery, despite the continuing murmurs of disapproval from some townspeople. "How are you feeling today?" Eleanor asked, placing a cup of mild herbal tea beside Theo's bed. "Better." Theo's voice was stronger, though his face remained pale. "My head doesn't hurt anymore." "That's progress." Eleanor smiled, the expression coming more naturally now. "Your grandfather says you've been writing in your recovery journal." Walter had given Theo a leather-bound notebook to record his thoughts during convalescence, a way to process the strange fever dreams that still preoccupied the boy. Theo nodded, reaching for the journal on his nightstand. "I'm trying to remember everything before it fades away, like waking up from a really vivid dream." "May I?" Eleanor asked, gesturing toward the journal. Theo handed it over without hesitation. "Some parts don't make sense. They're all jumbled up." Eleanor opened the journal, Walter looking over her shoulder as they examined Theo's careful handwriting and detailed sketches. The drawings had evolved from the feverish scribbles of his illness, now rendered with the deliberate precision of memory rather than delirium. A creek with distinctive rock formations, a cluster of nightshade plants growing beside a fallen tree, a young girl with blonde braids kneeling to examine something in the water, a woman who resembled a younger Eleanor gathering herbs on a distant hillside. "Theo," Walter said carefully, "how do you know these places, these people?" The boy frowned slightly, considering. "It's like I was there but not really there, more like watching through someone else's eyes." He turned the page to reveal more drawings. "Sometimes I was seeing through Sarah's eyes, sometimes through someone hiding nearby." Eleanor's breath caught. "Someone hiding?" Theo nodded. "A boy, older than me. He was watching Sarah from the trees." He flipped to a specific drawing, a crude rendering of a teenage boy with a distinctive jacket, observing the scene by the creek. He saw her eat the berries, but didn't warn her. He was afraid of getting in trouble for being there. Walter and Eleanor exchanged glances. "Theo, did you see this boy's face clearly?" Walter asked. "Not really, but I could feel what he felt." Theo's voice lowered. He was scared, and later he felt guilty. Martha, who had been bringing fresh supplies, paused in the doorway, listening. "Could you recognize anything else about this boy?" Eleanor asked gently. Theo turned to a detailed sketch of a jacket with a distinctive patch on the sleeve. "He wore this. It had some kind of animal on it." Martha stepped forward, her face suddenly pale. "That's the Pinecrest Hunting Club emblem. My brother Ryan was a member back then." "Ryan was there?" Mayor Harmon asked from behind her, having arrived to check on Theo's progress. "I don't know," Martha replied, troubled, "but he was friends with Sarah's older brother. They used to hunt in those woods." Theo continued turning pages, revealing more scenes, the hidden boy running away, Sarah returning home with berries in her pocket, the sequence of her falling ill after cutting her hand, Eleanor working desperately to help the deteriorating child. "I don't understand how you could know these things," Walter said, both amazed and disturbed. "Sometimes," Eleanor said slowly, "certain sensitive individuals can perceive impressions left on places or objects, echoes of intense events." "Like ghosts?" Theo asked. "Not exactly, more like memories that linger in the world around us. Most people can't access them, but some can, especially children." She hesitated before adding, "It's a gift I once had myself, though I learned to suppress it because it scared people," Theo guessed. Eleanor nodded. "People fear what they don't understand. So I'm like you?" Theo asked, something like hope in his voice. In some ways, perhaps. Eleanor smiled sadly. It can be difficult seeing things others can't. That's why you understood the plants so well, Walter said thoughtfully. You could sense their properties beyond what books taught. My grandmother called it the knowing, an intuitive understanding that went deeper than conventional learning. Eleanor turned back to Theo. But I didn't realize you shared this sensitivity until your fever visions. Theo closed the journal. Is that why I got sick in the same way? Because I'm connected to what happened? No, Eleanor assured him. That was coincidence, or perhaps fate. You must have encountered Nightshade during your explorations, just as Sarah did. In my dreams I saw where it grows, Theo confirmed. Near the lightning-struck pine, where grandfather says not to go beyond. Walter sighed heavily. I should have been more specific about why that boundary existed. Mayor Harmon had been listening with increasing discomfort. This is difficult to accept. These visions, this knowing. Yet the boy knew details none of us ever spoke about, Martha pointed out. Things only someone who was there could know. Or someone with a powerful imagination, the mayor countered, though without conviction. Theo looked up at Eleanor. My mother could do it too, couldn't she? That's why you looked strange when grandfather mentioned her name. Eleanor's expression softened. What makes you think that? In my visions, there was a woman who looked like me, who could sense the plants too. She wasn't Sarah or you. She was someone else. Walter stilled. Catherine, my daughter-in-law. I never met Catherine, Eleanor said carefully, but if she had this gift, it would explain why Theo does as well. These sensitivities often run in families. Catherine always knew when something was wrong before it happened, Walter remembered quietly. Could identify plants without being taught. We called it her uncanny knack. A silence fell as they absorbed the implications. Theo opened his journal again, turning to a page he hadn't shown them yet, a drawing of 3 women standing together, their faces rendered with surprising detail. Eleanor, an unknown young woman who resembled Theo, and between them, a third figure that Eleanor recognized with a shock. My sister, she whispered. That's my sister Rachel. Walter leaned closer, his face suddenly draining of color as he stared at the woman who resembled Theo. And that's Catherine. The cabin fell silent as Walter and Eleanor stared at Theo's drawing. The resemblance was undeniable. The woman beside Eleanor's sister Rachel was indeed Catherine, Walter's daughter-in-law. How is this possible? Walter finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor shook her head, equally bewildered. I don't understand. I never met your daughter-in-law, but my sister did, she added slowly, realization dawning. Rachel left Pinecrest 25 years ago. We lost touch. Martha and Mayor Harmon exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal. Martha quietly ushered the mayor toward the door, giving the family privacy. They stepped outside, where a few persistent townspeople still lingered, waiting for news. Inside, Walter moved to a cedar chest in the corner of the room. With reverent hands, he lifted out a worn family Bible, its leather cover cracked with age. Catherine came into my son James's life, seemingly from nowhere, Walter explained, returning to Theo's bedside. They met while he was working construction in Westfield. She never spoke much about her family, said only that they were no longer in her life. He opened the Bible to the family records section, where births, deaths, and marriages had been carefully recorded for generations. His finger traced the entry for his son's marriage. James Granger married Catherine Miller, June 12, 1998. Miller. Eleanor's voice caught on the name. That was my sister's married name. Rachel Blackwood became Rachel Miller when she married Thomas Miller from Westfield. Walter continued, Catherine's middle name was Rachel. We thought it was just a coincidence that he stopped suddenly, staring at Eleanor. Sarah Miller, the child who died, was she related to your sister's husband? Thomas's niece, Eleanor confirmed quietly. His brother's child. Theo looked between the adults, following the connections faster than they could voice them. So Catherine was my niece, Eleanor whispered. Rachel's daughter, which makes you your great-nephew. Walter finished, the revelation settling heavily in the room. Eleanor sat abruptly, overwhelmed. All these years, you were here, and I never knew. Catherine never mentioned having an aunt in Pinecrest, Walter said, though she did say her mother had a falling out with family here. Rachel and I disagreed about her marriage, Eleanor explained, old pain evident in her voice. Thomas Miller had a reputation. I warned her against him. She chose him anyway and cut ties with me completely. She left him eventually, Walter said gently. Catherine told James that her mother raised her alone after leaving an unhappy marriage. Eleanor nodded, tears forming. Rachel always was stubborn, but brave when it mattered. Theo had been quietly turning pages in his journal during this exchange. He stopped at a new drawing, a young woman holding a baby, standing at a crossroads. I saw her too, he said, my grandmother. She wanted to come back to Pinecrest, but she was afraid. Afraid of what? Walter asked. Of him not forgiving her, Theo replied simply, looking at Eleanor. Eleanor covered her mouth, emotion overwhelming her practiced composure. I wrote so many letters that came back unopened. I never stopped trying to find her. And all this time her daughter was married to my son, Walter said wonderingly. Catherine and James lived in Westfield until the accident 3 years ago. The pieces continued falling into place, the invisible threads that had drawn them together across time and misunderstanding. That's why I was drawn to Miss Blackwood, Theo realized, even before I knew who she was. Blood knows blood, Eleanor said softly, an old saying her grandmother had often repeated. Walter closed the family Bible, then reopened it to a different section, a collection of tucked-away photographs protected between the pages. He withdrew one showing a young woman holding a toddler, Catherine with Theo, just before she and James died in the car accident, he explained, passing the photo to Eleanor. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. She has Rachel's smile, she observed, drinking in the features of the niece she'd never known, and her eyes. I have something too, Eleanor said after a moment. Rising with new purpose, she went to her medical bag and removed a hidden compartment from its lining. Inside was a small, faded photograph, 2 young women with their arms around each other, standing before Pinecrest's autumn foliage. Rachel and me, before she left, Eleanor explained, returning to show Walter and Theo, the last picture we took together. Walter studied it intently. Catherine kept a copy of this exact photo. She never said who the other woman was, just that it was family. She knew, Eleanor realized. Rachel must have told her something about me, at least. Theo touched the photographs reverently. So we really are family, not just because I can see things like you can. Eleanor nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. By blood and by gift, both. The revelation hung in the air between them, 3 people connected by invisible ties, suddenly made visible, a family fractured by misunderstanding now facing the possibility of healing. Outside, Martha returned to the porch where Mayor Harmon waited, his expression troubled. Should we check on them, he asked, concern evident despite his lingering suspicions. Martha shook her head. Some moments need privacy. I think we've interfered enough in Eleanor Blackwood's life. Inside, Walter carefully returned the Bible to its place in the cedar chest. When he turned back, he found Eleanor and Theo examining their hands side by side, noticing for the first time the similar shape of their fingers, the shared features that blood had carried through generations. Rachel would have loved to see this, Eleanor said softly. She knows, Theo replied with the simple certainty of a child. I saw her in my dreams too. She's happy we found each other. News spread through Pinecrest with the efficiency that only small towns can achieve. By the following evening, everyone knew that Eleanor Blackwood was Theo Granger's great-aunt, that the doctor's suppressed letter had exonerated her in Sarah's death, and that Theo had mysteriously known details about the tragedy that no one had told him. The community stood divided. Some, like Martha, felt the weight of 15 years of wrongful suspicion and ostracism. Others, including Elder Thomas, remained skeptical of this convenient family revelation and insisted that Eleanor's influence over the boy and his grandfather was itself cause for concern. Meanwhile, Theo continued to recover, now openly under Eleanor's care. The boy who had once been shunned at school for visiting the witch had suddenly become the center of a story too extraordinary for even the most stubborn minds to dismiss entirely. 3 days after the family discovery, Martha knocked on Walter's door, her expression both determined and apprehensive. I've come on behalf of some townspeople, she explained when Walter invited her inside. We'd like to speak with Eleanor, if she's willing. Eleanor emerged from Theo's room, wariness evident in her posture. I'm listening, not just me, Martha clarified. There's a gathering at the community hall. People have questions, concerns, and some apologies to offer. Eleanor and Walter exchanged glances. A public reconciliation or a public trial? Walter asked bluntly. Neither, or perhaps both. Martha twisted her hands nervously. The truth is, we're struggling with how to move forward. 15 years of belief doesn't disappear overnight, but Dr. Hendrix's letter and Theo's visions, they've shaken many of us, and the family connection, Eleanor asked quietly. That too, though some call it convenient timing. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. And Mayor Harmon's position? Conflicted, Martha admitted. He was there when Sarah died, saw things that haunted him, but he's also a fair man, when pushed to be. Eleanor considered this, then looked toward Theo's room. I've spent 15 years avoiding confrontation with Pinecrest. Perhaps it's time to face it directly. The community hall hummed with tense conversation when Eleanor entered alongside Walter and Martha. Faces turned, voices hushed, and bodies shifted in wooden chairs as the trio made their way to the front of the room. Mayor Harmon stood at a small podium, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Blackwood has agreed to address your questions, he announced, stepping aside to allow Eleanor the floor. She stood before them, these neighbors who had crossed streets to avoid her, who had pulled children away at her approach, who had whispered witch behind cupped hands for 15 years. In their faces she saw fear, skepticism, curiosity, and in some, genuine regret. I've lived among you for over 30 years, she began, her voice steady. For 15 of those years, I've existed as your cautionary tale, the woman on the hill to be feared and avoided. Today I stand before you not to demand apologies or assign blame, but to acknowledge a truth. We all failed Sarah Miller. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I failed her by not recognizing nightshade poisoning. The doctor failed her by not being present when needed, and collectively we failed her by allowing fear and grief to obscure truth. From his seat in the front row, Sarah's father spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. You tried to save her. The letter makes that clear. I did, Eleanor acknowledged, but understanding came too late. Why didn't you defend yourself more vigorously? Someone called from the back. Why accept our judgment if you knew it was wrong? Eleanor's gaze swept across the room. Grief needs somewhere to land. Sometimes accepting blame seems kinder than forcing grieving people to accept that no one is to blame, that sometimes tragedy simply happens. Mayor Harmon stepped forward. That wasn't your decision to make. No, Eleanor agreed, it wasn't. My silence was its own form of arrogance, believing I knew what was best for others. A thoughtful quiet settled over the hall. Martha took the opportunity to address the gathering. I've known Eleanor since we were girls, she said. Before Sarah, before the rumors, she was the person we all turned to for remedies and help. I let fear overrule decades of friendship, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. Her simple apology broke something in the room, a dam of unacknowledged regret. Several others stood to offer their own recollections of Eleanor before the tragedy, of help given and kindness shown. Not everyone participated. Elder Thomas and a handful of others maintained stony silence, their skepticism undiminished. But they were now the minority. What happens now? Mayor Harmon asked, addressing both Eleanor and the community. That depends, Eleanor replied, on whether Pinecrest is willing to re-examine more than just my particular case, whether we can acknowledge that fear and superstition have shaped other judgments as well. The autumn festival is next week, Martha said suddenly. It's always been a time of community renewal. She turned to Eleanor. Would you consider attending, as a gesture of new beginnings? The invitation hung in the air, not just Martha's words, but what they represented. Reintegration, acceptance, a place at the table she'd been denied for 15 years. Eleanor hesitated, decades of isolation making such a public return daunting. I'll consider it, she finally said. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah's father approached Eleanor privately. From his pocket, he withdrew a carefully folded paper, an invitation to the autumn festival, handwritten and dated 3 days earlier. My wife made this for you, he said simply. Before we knew about the doctor's letter, before any of this. She said 15 years was long enough for all of us to carry this weight. Eleanor accepted it with trembling fingers, this first formal inclusion extending beyond mere tolerance to actual welcome. Outside the hall, the mountain air carried the scent of approaching winter. Eleanor paused on the steps, watching the townspeople disperse, some nodding to her, others still avoiding her gaze, a community in the painful process of re-examining its collective certainties. "Well," Walter asked, joining her, "will you attend?" Eleanor looked down at the invitation in her hand. Theo would enjoy the festival, she said, her decision made not for herself alone, but for the family she had unexpectedly found. Golden light bathed the town square as Pinecrest celebrated its autumn festival. Garlands of colored leaves adorned lampposts, and tables groaned under the weight of harvest offerings, Martha's apple cider, fresh-baked pumpkin bread, preserves of every variety. Children darted between hay bales and corn shock decorations, while musicians tuned fiddles and guitars on a small wooden stage. At the edge of the festivities, Eleanor hesitated, one hand clutching her contribution, a basket of herbal teas blended for winter wellness, the other absently smoothing her best dress, unworn for 15 years. Having second thoughts, Walter asked gently, standing beside her with Theo. "Perhaps a few," Eleanor admitted. "Old habits of caution are hard to break." Theo, fully recovered and vibrant with excitement, took her hand. "You look nice, Aunt Eleanor." The title still felt new, precious in its simplicity. Eleanor smiled at the boy. "Thank you, Theo. So do you." Together, the unlikely family stepped into the square. Conversations faltered momentarily as townspeople noticed Eleanor's arrival. Then Martha hurried forward, enveloping her in a warm embrace that bridged 15 years of distance. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "And I said I would." Eleanor gestured to her basket. "And I brought something for the community table." Martha accepted the basket with appropriate ceremony. "We've saved a special place for it." Not everyone was as welcoming as Martha. Some, like Elder Thomas, acknowledged Eleanor's presence with stiff nods at best. Others, unsure how to navigate this new reality, offered awkward greetings before finding reasons to move elsewhere. But there were genuine smiles too, hesitant attempts at reconnection, small kindnesses that felt monumental after years of avoidance. As twilight approached, Mayor Harmon called for the community's attention. Beside the traditional harvest display stood something new, a large quilt frame supporting a colorful patchwork. "This year's festival holds special meaning," the mayor announced. "It's not only a celebration of harvest, but of healing. Each family in Pinecrest has contributed a square to our first community quilt, including one added just this morning." He gestured to a square in the quilt's corner, a beautifully embroidered pattern of healing herbs surrounding a cabin on a hillside. Eleanor's contribution, sewn in the pre-dawn hours with hands that remembered the craft despite years of disuse. The quilt reminds us that we are many individual pieces sewn into one community, Mayor Harmon continued. "When we tear that fabric through fear or misunderstanding, we all become less." His eyes met Eleanor's briefly, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that held its own form of respect. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself approached by several townsfolk seeking advice about winter ailments or gardening challenges. Their questions came haltingly at first, weighted with the awkwardness of 15 years of deliberate distance. But as she answered with her characteristic straightforward knowledge, old rhythms of trust began to re-establish themselves. "You should teach a workshop on medicinal herbs," suggested Mrs. Peterson, who had once grabbed her child's hand at Eleanor's approach. "Many of the younger folks have never learned the old ways." "Perhaps I will," Eleanor replied, surprised to find herself considering it. Later, as musicians played and couples danced beneath strings of lanterns, Eleanor sat with Walter and Theo at a table near the edge of the square. The boy was devouring his third slice of pumpkin bread, frosting clinging to his chin. "This is nice," Walter observed, watching the dancers, "being part of things again." "Again?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You've only been in Pinecrest a few months yourself." "I meant you," he clarified. "Though I suppose I've been holding myself apart too, in my own way. Grief does that." Eleanor nodded, understanding the isolation of loss. "We've all been alone in different ways." "Not anymore," Theo interjected, his mouth still full of bread. Eleanor smiled, ruffling the boy's hair with newfound familial ease. "No, not anymore." As the evening drew to a close, the traditional bonfire was lit at the center of the square. Families gathered around it, faces illuminated by golden flames reaching toward the star-scattered sky. Sarah's parents approached Eleanor beside the fire, their expressions solemn, but without the anger that had defined their interactions for 15 years. "We'd like Theo to know about Sarah," her mother said softly. "When he's feeling stronger. She would have been his cousin, in a way. I think he'd like that," Eleanor replied, touched by the gesture of inclusion. As the crowd thinned and the night deepened, Eleanor stood with Walter and Theo on the path leading back to their cabins. Below them, Pinecrest glowed with lamplight, the embers of the bonfire still pulsing at its heart. Above, stars wheeled in patterns Eleanor had watched for decades from her solitary porch. "Will you come live with us now?" Theo asked suddenly, voicing the question with a child's directness. Eleanor and Walter exchanged startled glances. "I have my own home," she began carefully, "but we're family," Theo persisted, "and it's closer to town for when you teach people about plants." Walter cleared his throat. "What Theo means is that you're welcome any time. We have plenty of room." Eleanor looked between them. This unexpected family, the universe had returned to her, and then toward her cabin on the hillside. For 15 years it had been her sanctuary and her prison. Now, perhaps it could simply be a home, one of two she might move between. "We'll work something out," she promised, placing a hand on Theo's shoulder. Together they climbed the moonlit path, three figures moving in easy harmony, no longer alone on the mountain.